She demanded an engagement party, but only when I'd be rich like her friends' husbands. Otherwise, we're done, so I simply broke up with her and blocked all her accounts. My name is Tyler, and I have to share what happened when I thought I was ready to take the next step in my relationship. Looking back now, I realized that proposing didn't feel as momentous as I had always imagined it would. I mean, the actual moment of doing it felt strangely ordinary, almost anticlimactic. I deliberately didn't go for anything dramatic or over the top. No flash mobs, no surprise rings hidden in dessert. None of that elaborate stuff you see in movies. Instead, I chose a regular Saturday evening for what I thought would be one of the most important moments of our lives. We went to this Mexican restaurant that she was absolutely obsessed with. You know, the kind of place with warm, amber lighting and those incredible tortilla chips that you can't stop eating. I had the engagement ring sitting in my jacket pocket throughout the entire dinner, and it felt like carrying around a loaded weapon. The weight of it seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute, and I kept mentally rehearsing how I would pull it out and what I would say. My plan was simple. I'd pop the question after we finished eating. Nothing too fancy or elaborate, just the two of us in a comfortable setting where we'd shared so many good meals before. We'd been dating for about a year and a half by that point, which felt like long enough to really know what we both wanted from this relationship. We weren't some naive college kids just playing house or figuring out adult life together. I wasn't taking wild guesses about our compatibility or our future potential. I genuinely believed I knew exactly what I was after, and I thought she felt the same way about building something lasting together. She wasn't some perfect angel. Nobody ever is, and I wasn't looking for perfection anyway. What drew me to her was that she was intelligent, absolutely hilarious when she stopped overthinking every little detail, and she seemed to understand me on a level that most people in my life simply didn't. Or at least, that's what I believed was true at the time. When I finally worked up the courage to pull out that little velvet box, her facial expression barely shifted at all. I still remember that moment with crystal clarity because it was so different from what I had expected or hoped for. She stared at the ring like it was some kind of pop quiz she hadn't studied for, something that required careful calculation rather than an emotional response. She didn't reach across the table to take the box from my hands. She didn't break into the smile I had been picturing in my head for weeks. She didn't even seem particularly surprised or moved by the gesture. Instead, she just looked at me and said, "Ask me again when you're making over $250K. She delivered this line completely flat, like she was reading the weather forecast or stating some basic, undeniable fact. There was no malice in her voice, no cruelty or intention to hurt me. It wasn't brutal in the way you might expect. It was just matter of fact, as if she was simply being practical about the whole situation. Then she went ahead and explained her reasoning in detail, as if I somehow needed additional clarification about what she had just said. She told me that she had her sights set on a particular kind of lifestyle, one that required a certain level of financial security and comfort. What really struck me was when she mentioned that every single one of her girlfriends had made identical decisions when it came to marriage and long-term commitment. According to her, none of them were marrying anyone who was pulling in less than $250,000 annually. This wasn't just her personal standard, it was apparently the baseline expectation among her entire social circle. She explained this like it was common knowledge, something that any reasonable person would understand and accept without question. She didn't deliver any of this information with malice or cruelty. In fact, she seemed to genuinely believe she was doing me a favor by being so upfront and practical about everything. There was no anger in her voice, no frustration or disappointment. She spoke like someone laying out the terms of a business arrangement, explaining the requirements clearly so there wouldn't be any confusion later. I didn't have much to say in response to all of this. I just sat there and nodded slowly, trying to process what I was hearing. The ring went back into my pocket, and somehow we managed to finish our dinner like nothing earth-shattering had just happened between us. I covered the check as usual, and we walked out of the restaurant together. The silence between us during the drive home wasn't even particularly awkward. It was just completely numb, like we were both operating on autopilot. I kept waiting for one of us to say something, to acknowledge what had just occurred, but neither of us did. We just drove through the familiar streets in complete quiet, and I remember thinking how surreal the whole situation felt. Here's the thing that still gets to me when I think back on that night. I didn't stand up and walk away right then and there. I absolutely should have. Any guy with even a tiny shred of self-respect probably would have ended things on the spot, but I didn't do that. Instead, I somehow convinced myself that this wasn't actually a rejection in the traditional sense. I told myself it was just some weird, messed-up postponement, a completely bizarre delay, but not necessarily the end of everything we had built together. I gave her every benefit of the doubt I could possibly manage, making excuses for her response and trying to rationalize why someone who claimed to love me would reduce our entire relationship to a salary requirement. But something fundamental cracked open inside me after that night. I didn't feel the same way about her anymore, and I didn't feel the same way about what we had together. The foundation of trust and mutual respect that I thought we had built over a year and a half suddenly felt incredibly fragile and conditional. I kept showing up, though, going through all the motions of being in a relationship. I continued our regular routines, our dinner dates, our weekend plans, our conversations about daily life, but everything just started falling away from me emotionally. It was like I was watching our relationship from the outside, playing a role rather than genuinely participating in it. I found myself paying much closer attention to how she talked about the world around us. I started really listening when she discussed her coworkers, her friends, and their boyfriends' careers and financial situations. She would casually mention who had just bought a condo, who was driving what kind of car, whose partner had gotten a promotion or a raise. She had always made those kinds of comments before, but now they hit me completely differently. I began to realize how much of her entire worldview was measured against other people's accomplishments and material success. It wasn't about our life together or what we were building as a team. It was about how we stacked up against someone else's achievements and lifestyle choices. I made a conscious decision not to start arguments with her about what had happened at the restaurant. I didn't bring up the proposal again or try to rehash the conversation about her salary requirements. Instead, I just started really paying attention to everything. The way she spoke, the way she reacted to different situations, the way she viewed our relationship and my role in it. I began noticing how she would casually brush off things that were important to me. For instance, when I mentioned being completely exhausted from work after pulling several long days in a row, she would respond with something like, "Well, you're not even on the partner track yet." She wasn't trying to be deliberately cruel, but these little comments felt like constant reminders that my current efforts weren't enough, that I was somehow falling short of where I should be at this stage in my career. Or when I had to skip a weekend getaway we had planned because I was covering for a senior associate who had completely screwed up a major project, she rolled her eyes like I was being overdramatic about the whole situation. She acted like I was choosing work over her for no good reason, rather than understanding that sometimes professional responsibilities require sacrifices, especially when you're trying to build a career. After a while, I just stopped trying to explain myself or justify my decisions to her. It became clear that she thought she was somehow motivating me with these comments and reactions. That was the story she had constructed in her mind anyway, that she wanted more out of life. And if she tied that desire to our commitment as a couple, I would somehow rise up to meet her expectations and push myself to achieve more. It was like she saw me as the protagonist in some streaming drama who just needed the perfect push to finally step up and claim his destiny. She genuinely believed that her conditional love and specific financial requirements would inspire me to reach new heights in my career, as if I had just been coasting along waiting for the right motivation to kick into high gear. The thing is, I've always been a dedicated worker. I didn't need her elaborate system of rewards and punishments to motivate me to succeed professionally. I've been grinding and putting in serious effort since my law school days, long before I ever met her. My job as a marketing consultant isn't particularly glamorous or exciting. Most of it involves grunt work, endless research, and making sure that senior partners don't completely screw up their project timelines and client relationships. But I was building something real and meaningful, slowly but steadily. I was developing expertise, gaining experience, and working toward long-term career goals. What she didn't understand, or maybe didn't care to understand, was that I wanted to build this future together with her as my partner. I didn't want to build it for her like some kind of offering or tribute that I would present once it was complete. There's a massive difference between those two approaches to a relationship. One involves two people working together as a team toward shared goals, supporting each other through the inevitable challenges and setbacks. The other treats one person like a contractor who needs to complete a project to specification before the other person will even consider participating. That fundamental difference in perspective was exactly where all the emotional distance between us started coming from. It wasn't resentment or even real anger on my part. It was just complete and total clarity about what our relationship actually was versus what I had thought it was. I realized that we had very different ideas about partnership, commitment, and what it means to build a life with someone you love. 2 months after that disaster of a dinner, our lease was coming up for renewal, and I realized this was going to be a major decision point for both of us. I didn't tell her about what I was thinking right away. Instead, I decided to wait and watch how everything played out between us. I wanted to give her plenty of space and time to maybe reflect on what had happened, to possibly backtrack a little, or say something that would make me believe she still saw me as a person, rather than just a future paycheck. She didn't do any of that. If anything, she doubled down even harder on her approach to our relationship. She kept bringing up stories about her social circle and their romantic situations, always with a focus on financial achievements and material success. She would tell me about how her friend Melissa had just gotten engaged to some tech guy who was working up in Silicon Valley, making it clear that his salary was the most impressive thing about him. Or she would mention how Victoria's fiancé had bought a house outright, paying cash for the entire thing without needing a mortgage. She would share these stories like they were just casual updates about her friends' lives, but I could tell there was always an underlying message about what successful relationships looked like and what kind of men were worth committing to. I would sit there and nod along politely, not because I agreed with any of her perspectives or found these stories particularly inspiring. I was just completely done with arguing about it. I was done trying to sell myself to her or convince her that I had value beyond my current earning potential. These conversations felt pointless because we were operating from completely different sets of values and priorities. Some nights I would look at her while she was talking about someone else's engagement ring or someone else's vacation house, and I would think to myself, do you really believe this is going to motivate me? Do you think this is actually how I work as a person? It was honestly weird to realize how little she understood about what drove me or how I approached challenges in my career and personal life. I still cared about her deeply during this period. I still loved her in some quiet, leftover way that made the whole situation even more confusing and painful. But the version of her that I was seeing more clearly now wasn't someone I could realistically build a future with. She was someone who was waiting for the blueprint of our life to be completely finished before she would even consider stepping inside and making it a home. It felt like she expected me to construct the entire house of our future by myself, the career success, the financial stability, the lifestyle upgrades, and then just hand her all the keys once everything was perfect and complete. That's not how partnerships work, at least not the kind of partnership I wanted to be part of. I didn't even bring up the marriage proposal again during those 2 months. Why would I at that point? What was I supposed to say? Hey, is my salary number high enough now? That's not love between two people who are building something together. That's just a business transaction with romantic window dressing. So I made the decision to wait and let time pass naturally. I let her talk about whatever she wanted to discuss. I let her make all her plans for the future and book her yoga classes and order sushi delivery and vent about frustrations with her job. I went through the motions of being a supportive boyfriend while mentally preparing myself for what I knew was coming. When we finally got that email from the leasing office asking about renewing our lease for another year, I knew it was time to have the conversation I had been avoiding. I had already been quietly looking at apartments on my own, not serious apartment hunting yet, just scouting around and getting a sense of what was available in my price range. I was mentally preparing myself for this transition and getting completely clear about what I needed to do. I still hadn't said a single word to her about any of my plans or feelings. Not about the proposal that had gone so badly, not about her $250K requirement, and definitely not about all the constant comparisons she made to other couples and their financial situations. I was just sitting with everything, observing how our dynamic played out day after day, and watching it all unfold naturally. Maybe she thought I was totally fine with everything that had happened between us. Maybe she assumed I was just busy with work stuff or stressed about some project deadline. Maybe she figured I was distracted by other things in my life, and that's why I seemed more distant than usual. But I wasn't any of those things. I was completely done with the whole situation. I was just waiting for the right moment to finally say it out loud and make it official. The decision had already been made in my mind weeks earlier. I just needed the lease renewal to force the conversation we both knew was coming. Jessica's perspective. Hey there, I'm Jessica, and I want to share my side of what happened because I honestly didn't think it was that big of a deal at all when it first occurred. I was just being completely honest with Tyler about where I stood and what I needed from our relationship to move forward. When he proposed to me that night at the Mexican restaurant, I wasn't trying to be rude or mean or deliberately hurtful. I just said exactly what I felt in that moment, and I told him the truth about what I was thinking. I said I wasn't ready to get engaged yet, and that I wanted him to ask me again when he was making over $250,000 annually. That's not an outrageous or unreasonable request. That's just being clear about your standards and expectations, setting proper boundaries about what kind of future you want to build with someone. Everyone I know is doing the exact same thing when it comes to marriage and long-term commitment. My friend Melissa said no to her boyfriend last year because he was still making under $180,000, even though they had been together for almost 3 years. Victoria gave her boyfriend a straight ultimatum. either level up financially within the next year or she was going to walk away and find someone who was more serious about building wealth and security. It's not personal against them as individual people or a judgment about their character. It's just about where we are in our lives right now and what we need to feel confident about the future. We're pushing into our mid-20s, and if we're going to build something real and lasting with a partner, there has to be genuine financial stability there. I want real comfort and security in my life. I want an actual plan for building wealth and achieving the lifestyle I've always envisioned for myself. I don't want to spend my 20s and 30s scraping by paycheck to paycheck, pretending that love alone makes up for all the financial stress and limitations that come with settling for less than what you deserve. Tyler was doing fine for his age. I think he was making around $140,000 at the time, which is decent money for someone in his position. But it's not enough for what I want long-term from life and from a marriage. He was working hard, absolutely, and I respected his dedication to his career. But hard work doesn't automatically translate into the kind of success that creates real financial freedom. You have to be strategic about these things. You have to be smart about your career moves and intentional about the choices you make. I thought he would totally understand that logic and appreciate my honesty about what I needed from him. After I explained my position to him that night, he didn't fight back or get angry with me. He didn't storm off dramatically or make a scene in the restaurant. He just kind of shut down emotionally, which should have been a red flag for me looking back on it now, but at the time, I figured he just needed some space to process what I had told him. I understand that guys can be really sensitive when it comes to discussions about money and career expectations. I get that it can feel like criticism or judgment about their current situation. But I thought if he really loved me and was serious about our future together, he would understand that I wasn't rejecting him as a person. I was challenging him to be better, to push himself harder and giving him something concrete to work toward. I wanted him to step up and be the man in this relationship. If you say you want a future with me, then you need to act like it and build something worthy of that commitment. But after that night at the restaurant, something definitely shifted between us in a way I hadn't expected. He didn't bring up the proposal again, didn't mention marriage or talk about our long-term plans at all. He just got really quiet and withdrawn, like he was emotionally checking out of our relationship or maybe sulking about the whole conversation. He still did what he was supposed to do as my boyfriend. He showed up for dates. He was physically present during our time together. He went through all the motions of being in a relationship. But the energy between us was completely different. There was a distance there that hadn't existed before, and I could feel him pulling away from me even when we were sitting right next to each other. I don't know. Maybe he thought I would come back to him later and say that I had changed my mind about everything. Maybe he was hoping I would lower my standards just because he had bought an engagement ring and made some romantic gesture. But I wasn't going to do that, obviously. Why would I compromise on something so important to my future happiness and security? That's not how I was raised by my parents, and that's not how any of my friends approach these kinds of major life decisions. You hold out for exactly what you deserve, and you don't settle for less just because it's easier or more convenient in the short term. I started thinking that maybe he was just being overdramatic about the whole situation. Like, okay, maybe he needed a few months to refocus his energy and really commit to advancing his career. Maybe he needed to hear my expectations stated clearly and directly so he would actually start aiming higher professionally and taking his earning potential more seriously. But then one evening, we were just sitting on the couch together watching Netflix. Nothing special was happening, just a regular weeknight at home like we'd had hundreds of times before. He suddenly turns to me and says, completely out of nowhere, "I'm not renewing the lease." I blinked at him like he was speaking a foreign language or making some kind of joke that I didn't understand. I was like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean you're not renewing the lease?" He said it again, as calm and matter-of-fact as anything. "When the lease is up next month, I'm moving out. This relationship is done." There was no emotion in his voice at all, no explanation or invitation for discussion about what was happening between us. Just a final statement delivered like he was reading from a script, completely definitive and non-negotiable. I was absolutely stunned by this announcement. I actually laughed at first because it felt so fake and theatrical, like he was trying to scare me into changing my position or get some kind of big emotional reaction from me. But as I looked at his face, I realized he was completely serious about what he was saying. I tried to talk to him about this decision, but it was like trying to have a conversation with a brick wall. He wouldn't even look at me properly or engage with what I was saying. I reminded him that we had been together for a year and a half, that we had built something meaningful together, and that we were just figuring things out like any normal couple does. I told him that all couples go through rough patches like this, periods where they have to work through disagreements and different perspectives about the future. This didn't have to be the end of everything we had created together, We could talk through our issues and find a way forward that worked for both of us. He just nodded along to everything I said and repeated that he had already made his decision. There was no negotiation, no willingness to consider alternatives or compromise solutions. He had apparently been thinking about this for weeks without saying anything to me, and now his mind was completely made up. I asked if we could at least go month to month on the lease, instead of making such a dramatic change all at once. Maybe we didn't need to make any huge moves just yet. We could take some time to really think about what we both wanted and whether there was a way to work through our differences. He said no, absolutely not. That was it. End of discussion. He wasn't interested in buying more time or exploring other options. The lease would expire, he would move out, and our relationship would be officially over. I didn't even get angry at first because I was too confused and shocked to feel anything else. The whole situation didn't make any sense to me. This was Tyler, the same guy who used to wait outside my office building just so he could walk me home after work. The same guy who once sat through an entire poetry reading with me, even though he absolutely hated that kind of pretentious literary stuff and found it boring. He wasn't typically impulsive about major life decisions. He didn't just blow things up for no reason or make dramatic gestures when he was upset about something. He was usually thoughtful and measured in his approach to problems, always wanting to talk things through and find rational solutions. So I assumed this was just some kind of phase he was going through. Maybe it was a test of some sort, or maybe he was trying to get me to chase after him and prove how much I cared about our relationship. I figured if I gave him a little time and space, he would come back to his senses and realize he was overreacting to everything. I started trying different approaches to bring him back to reality. I was soft and understanding at first, then more firm and direct, then soft again. I told him he was overreacting to our conversation about money and career goals. I explained that he didn't really mean what he was saying, that he was just feeling hurt and confused about my expectations. He barely said a word back to me during any of these attempts. He just kept repeating that he was completely clear about his decision and that nothing I said was going to change his mind. It was like talking to a completely different person, someone I had never met before. I decided to talk to Melissa and Victoria about what was happening, thinking maybe they could help me understand Tyler's behavior or give me advice about how to handle the situation. They were absolutely shocked when I told them about his reaction to my proposal response and his decision to end our relationship. They said maybe he was just feeling insecure and emasculated by our conversation about salary requirements. Men can be really sensitive about feeling like they're not providing enough or measuring up to expectations. They suggested I should give him some space and time to miss me, let him work through his feelings without pressure from me. I tried the silent treatment approach, thinking maybe some distance would help him gain perspective on what he was throwing away. I waited a few days without reaching out, then checked in casually to see if his attitude had softened at all. But there was still no change in his demeanor or willingness to reconsider his decision. So I decided to step up my efforts and get more people involved. I reached out to our mutual friends, people he actually liked and respected, thinking they might be able to talk some sense into him. These were friends who had seen us together over the past year and a half, who knew how good we were as a couple and how much we cared about each other. But nothing worked at all. He looked right through all of their attempts to mediate or offer perspective on our situation. It was like he had switched something off inside himself, some fundamental part of his emotional connection to me and to our relationship. Like the second he heard that number, $250K, he had started writing his exit plan and nothing anyone said could change his trajectory. I couldn't believe how cold and detached he was being about everything we had built together. It felt like none of our time together mattered to him anymore, like I was just some phase he was shedding as he moved on to whatever came next in his life. I had expected him to fight for what we had, to show me that our relationship meant something worth preserving. I thought men were supposed to fight for love when it really mattered. That's what everyone always says, right? That if you're truly serious about someone, you don't just walk away from everything at the first sign of difficulty. You push through the challenging times and prove that you're worthy of the person you claim to love. But Tyler didn't even try to do any of that. He didn't make an effort to understand my perspective or find a compromise that could work for both of us. He just decided that my expectations were unreasonable and used that as justification to end everything we had created together. The days kept ticking down toward his planned move-out date, and I kept waiting for him to change his mind. I expected him to realize that he was making a huge mistake, that we could figure everything out together if we just communicated better about our different visions for the future. I thought he would eventually understand what I really meant when I talked about financial security and building the kind of life I wanted, but he never came around to that realization. The night before he was supposed to leave our apartment, he packed his belongings quietly and efficiently. He didn't linger around or try to create opportunities for meaningful conversation. He just folded his clothes methodically and boxed up his books like he was moving out of a college dorm room. I asked him one last time, watching him organize his stuff into neat piles. Are you really walking away from all of this? From everything we've built together over the past year and a half? He looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, completely calm and resolved. He said, I already did walk away. This is just making it official. And then he just left. He picked up his boxes, loaded them into his car, and drove away from our shared life like it had never meant anything significant to him at all. Tyler's perspective continues. I have to admit, I thought she would take the breakup harder than she actually did. Not that I wanted her to cry or beg or make some dramatic scene. I'm not that cruel. But I did expect some kind of reality check from her about what was actually happening between us and why I had made this decision. Instead, it seemed like she didn't believe I actually meant what I was saying. Like she thought I would flinch at the finish line and change my mind at the last second when it came time to actually follow through with ending our relationship. She tried several different approaches to change my mind over those final weeks before I moved out. She played the guilt card first, which was pretty predictable. We've been together for a year and a half, she would say. Are you really going to throw all that time and history away over one conversation? Then she shifted to the logical approach when emotional appeals didn't work. We don't have to make such a dramatic decision right now, she argued. Let's just go month to month on the lease and see how things develop between us. We can take more time to work through our differences. When that strategy failed to move me, she pivoted to warmth and affection. She started acting like nothing fundamental had changed between us, giving me soft eyes and speaking in careful, tender words. She was trying to recreate the intimacy we used to have, hoping to remind me of all the good times and positive feelings we had shared. But everything had changed completely, at least for me. The foundation of trust and mutual understanding that I thought we had built together was gone. I couldn't unsee what I had learned about how she viewed our relationship and my role in it. Then she brought in outside reinforcements, which was actually worse than her direct attempts to change my mind. One of her college friends called me up, some guy I barely knew and had maybe met twice at parties. He tried to play peacemaker, telling me that I was being rash about everything and that Jessica was just scared of commitment and didn't know how to express her feelings properly. I cut that conversation short immediately. I told him I wasn't interested in discussing my personal relationship with someone I don't even really know, and I hung up the phone. The whole thing felt presumptuous and inappropriate, like my private business was being discussed and analyzed by people who had no real understanding of what had happened between us. About a week later, her friend Victoria showed up at my office building during my lunch break. She was pretending that she just happened to be in the area, making small talk for a few minutes before sliding into her prepared speech about how you two were so great together and how I was making a mistake I would regret later. I didn't even let her finish that whole performance. I told her I had a meeting to get back to and walked away before she could continue with whatever intervention she had planned. The fact that Jessica was orchestrating these encounters through mutual friends just confirmed that she still didn't understand why I was ending things. The thing that everyone kept missing, Jessica, her friends, even some of our mutual acquaintances who got involved, was that I wasn't angry about what had happened at the restaurant. I wasn't being emotional or reactionary about her response to my proposal. I was simply done with the relationship, and that's a fundamentally different thing than being upset or hurt. Once I moved out of our shared apartment, I stopped looking back entirely. I found a smaller place close to my office. Nothing fancy or impressive, just clean and quiet and functional for what I needed. The first few nights in the new space felt strange. I'm not going to lie about that. There was no one talking to me the second I walked through the door after work. No background commentary about someone's latest engagement ring or promotion or salary increase. No constant stream of observations about other couples and how their relationships were progressing compared to ours. Just complete silence and space to think clearly. I hadn't realized how much of my mental and emotional energy had been going into managing and responding to all that noise. Once it was gone completely, I suddenly had actual room to breathe and focus on what I wanted to accomplish in my own life. I started waking up earlier than usual and developed completely new routines that worked better for my lifestyle and goals. I began hitting the gym before work instead of after, when I was tired and making excuses to skip workouts. I stopped making compromises and justifications for things that were important to my health and well-being. My focus at work became significantly sharper and more intentional. I started tightening up my casework in ways that I hadn't been doing before, paying closer attention to details and putting extra effort into projects that could advance my career. Without the constant emotional drain of managing relationship dynamics and expectations, I had more mental energy to dedicate to professional excellence. The senior partners at my firm noticed the change in my performance and attitude pretty quickly. One of them pulled me into his office after a particularly successful client presentation and said, You've been sharper lately. Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up. I didn't explain the personal circumstances behind my improved focus, just nodded and thanked him for the feedback. There was no need to get into the details of my breakup or how removing that source of stress and pressure had allowed me to perform at a higher level professionally. 7 months went by incredibly quickly after I moved out. I barely felt the time passing because my days had become so structured and productive. Just one day stacked on top of another, long, focused, meaningful days where I was accomplishing more than I had ever done before in my career. For the first time in years, work didn't feel like a grind or something I had to endure. It felt clean and simple and straightforward. There was no one to impress anymore besides myself and my colleagues. No external measuring stick to worry about or live up to. No constant pressure to achieve specific financial milestones by certain deadlines. Just the work itself and my own internal drive to excel. When the partnership announcement finally came down from the senior level, I didn't celebrate or make a big deal out of the achievement. I didn't call my parents or text friends or post anything on social media. I just sat with the news quietly and let it settle in my mind. The base salary increase was substantial, and when combined with the annual performance bonus structure, my total compensation would cross $280,000 this year. I actually laughed a little when I calculated that number, not because I was particularly proud of myself, but because the whole situation felt ridiculous and ironic. It was like some weird cosmic joke that had come full circle. Here was the exact financial milestone that Jessica had demanded, achieved through my own effort and dedication, and she wasn't part of my life anymore to see it or benefit from it. I didn't feel any urge to contact her about this professional success. I didn't want to send a "see, I told you so" message, or prove that I had been capable of reaching her standards all along. That impulse to seek her validation or recognition was completely dead inside me. The part of me that had once needed her approval or acknowledgement of my achievements had died the night she looked at an engagement ring and saw it as a financial calculation, rather than a symbol of love and commitment. It wasn't just about the money requirement she had imposed. The real issue was the way she had connected my worth as a partner to my earning potential, like my value as a person was directly tied to what I could deliver financially. It was the way she had treated love like a business transaction with specific terms and conditions that had to be met before she would fully participate. When someone looks at your best effort and your genuine feelings and says, "Come back when it's bigger," how are you supposed to interpret that as anything other than a fundamental rejection of who you are in that moment? She didn't just turn down an engagement ring that night at the restaurant. She turned down who I was as a person in that moment, and that was the real deal breaker for me. The financial requirement was just the surface level of a much deeper problem in how she viewed relationships and partnership. I still ran into mutual friends occasionally over the following months, and they would try to act casual about these encounters while clearly fishing for information about my personal life. One of them mentioned that Jessica was struggling financially with the rent on our old apartment, and that she had to pick up extra shifts at the bookstore where she worked part-time to make ends meet. I nodded politely and didn't offer any commentary about her situation. It wasn't my responsibility anymore to worry about her financial struggles or to feel guilty about the consequences of our breakup. She had made her priorities clear when we were together, and now she was living with the results of those choices. Another mutual friend told me that Jessica had been asking about me, wondering how I was doing and whether I was seeing anyone new. I told him that she didn't need to concern herself with my personal life anymore, and that it would be better for both of us if we maintained complete separation moving forward. Then, almost exactly a year after I had moved out, I received a long message from Jessica. It was classic Jessica style, emotional and wordy, trying to hit every possible angle and cover all her bases in one comprehensive communication. She said she missed me, and that she had been doing a lot of thinking about what had happened between us. She claimed that she didn't realize what she had lost when she let me walk away, and that love wasn't supposed to be logical or transactional the way she had approached it. She said she understood that now and wanted to try again if I was open to the possibility. She didn't mention the $250,000 requirement directly in her message, but it was sitting there between every sentence like an elephant in the room. The entire subtext of her communication was acknowledging that I had probably reached the financial milestone she had demanded, and now she was ready to reconsider our relationship. I read her message twice, sat with it for a while to make sure I wasn't reacting emotionally, and then typed out a single line in response. "I wish you well, but we're done." No drama, no lengthy explanation, no attempt to relitigate what had happened between us or why things had ended the way they did. Just a clear, final statement that put a definitive period at the end of our story. There was nothing left to discuss or negotiate about our situation. I didn't hate Jessica, and I still don't. She's not an evil person or someone who intentionally set out to hurt me. She's just entitled and conditioned by her social environment to expect that someone will build the perfect life and then invite her to move in once everything is finished and polished. Maybe that approach works for someone else. Maybe there are men out there who are motivated by that kind of conditional love and performance-based affection. That's not me, though. I built my career and my life through my own effort and sacrifice, and I'm not interested in handing the keys over to someone who only saw the value after everything was already complete. The chapter of my life that included Jessica closed completely the second I walked out of our shared apartment with my belongings. Everything that happened after that was just cleanup and confirmation of what I already knew, that we were fundamentally incompatible in our approaches to love, partnership, and building a life together. Jessica's perspective continues. I really didn't expect the breakup to be this difficult, both emotionally and practically. I figured the first couple of months would be tough while I adjusted to being single again, but then things would naturally even out and I'd find my footing. Maybe Tyler would miss me eventually, and I'd soften up about my expectations, and we'd find a way to talk through our differences like mature adults. That's how it usually goes with breakups, right? People separate for a while, they both get some perspective on what they had together, and then they circle back to each other when they're ready to work things out. That's completely normal, and what I expected would happen with us. But Tyler didn't circle back at all. He didn't even show the slightest hesitation or second thoughts about his decision. He just moved out of our apartment and completely disappeared from my life, like our year and a half together had meant absolutely nothing to him at all. Now suddenly everything was on me financially. Rent, utilities, groceries, internet, car insurance, every single little expense that comes with maintaining an independent adult life. I used to think we split our shared costs pretty evenly when we lived together, but I didn't realize how much Tyler was actually covering until he was completely gone and I had to handle everything by myself. It became this constant weekly struggle of watching the numbers in my bank account drop steadily while I tried to figure out how to make my paycheck stretch far enough to cover all my basic needs. I found myself playing these awful games with money, deciding whether to pay for groceries or utilities in any given week, and then pushing one expense to the following week while hoping nothing would bounce or get shut off. Before the breakup, I used to order takeout whenever I was tired after work or didn't feel like cooking. Now I spend my Sunday's meal prepping like some kind of fitness influencer, making big batches of rice and beans and whatever vegetables are on sale, portioning everything out for the entire week ahead. I used to take ride shares when it was raining or when I was running late for something. Now I wait at the bus stop in whatever weather and hope my jacket holds up against the elements. These might seem like small changes, but they add up to a completely different lifestyle than what I was used to when Tyler and I were sharing expenses. This isn't what I had pictured for my life at all, not even close to the financial security and comfort I thought I would have achieved by this point. At first, I didn't talk about my struggles much with anyone, because I didn't want my friends to think I couldn't handle being independent or taking care of myself. But then, Melissa mentioned casually that she had seen Tyler somewhere downtown, coming out of what looked like an important business meeting. She said he was wearing a really sharp, expensive-looking suit and seemed different somehow, more confident and polished than she remembered him being when we were together. She didn't elaborate much beyond that observation, but I could tell from her tone that she knew something she wasn't sharing with me. So I started asking around our mutual social circle, trying to be casual and not too obvious about my curiosity. Just innocent questions like, has anyone talked to Tyler lately or what's he been up to these days? That's when someone, I think it was Kyle from our college friend group, casually mentioned that Tyler had been promoted to junior partner at his law firm. He just dropped this information like it was no big deal, saying that Tyler's salary was now over $280,000 annually when you included his performance bonuses. I just sat there trying to process what I was hearing. I forced myself to laugh a little and tried to act like I was proud of his professional success, but inside I felt completely sick to my stomach. That number haunted me for days afterward, not just because it was significantly higher than the $250,000 threshold I had mentioned that night at the restaurant. The real issue was that he had actually achieved the financial milestone I wanted, and he had done it without me. He had reached the level of success and earning potential that I thought was necessary for our future together, and I wasn't part of any of it. I wasn't there to share in his achievement or benefit from the security and lifestyle that kind of income could provide. A few weeks after learning about Tyler's promotion, I had one of those random encounters that just completely devastated me emotionally. I was coming out of the pharmacy with my generic vitamins, the cheap store brand ones because I couldn't afford the name brand supplements I used to buy, when I heard the distinctive beep of a car unlocking nearby. I looked up instinctively and saw Tyler getting out of a sleek black BMW. Not a used one or some basic entry-level model, but what appeared to be a brand new, top-of-the-line luxury vehicle. Everything about him looked polished and successful. His clothes, his posture, his general demeanor. He had this air of confidence and self-assurance, like nothing in the world could touch him or shake his composure. He didn't see me standing there, or if he did notice me, he didn't show any recognition or acknowledgement. I just stood frozen in place for several long seconds, holding my little plastic bag of off-brand supplements, watching him walk into the upscale grocery store like he belonged in that world of expensive choices and premium products. I wanted to scream, not because I hated him or felt angry about his success, but because the whole situation felt so incredibly unfair and ironic. I had been there during all the difficult months when he was building toward this level of achievement. I was the one who listened to him complain about demanding partners at his firm talking down to him, about the ridiculous hours and the constant pressure and the professional burnout he was experiencing. I sat through all of those conversations with him, offering support and encouragement when he was struggling with the challenges of advancing his career. I was there for the frustration and the setbacks and the long nights when he questioned whether all his hard work would ever pay off. And now that he had actually made it to the level of success I thought was necessary for our future, he was just completely gone from my life. I tried to tell myself that he was being petty and vindictive, that he was still mad about what I had said that night at the restaurant and was holding out just to punish me for having standards and expectations. I wanted to believe that deep down he still cared about me and thought about our relationship, but that he was too proud or stubborn to reach out first. But the more time passed without any contact from him, the more it became clear that he didn't even think about me anymore. It felt like I had been completely erased from his mind and his life, like our year and a half together had been such an insignificant part of his journey that he could just move forward without looking back even once. So I finally decided to message him directly. I took my time crafting the perfect text, trying to strike the right balance between honest vulnerability and not coming across as desperate or needy. I didn't want to seem like I was only reaching out because I had heard about his financial success, even though that was obviously part of what motivated me to contact him. I told him that I missed him and that I had been doing a lot of thinking about what had happened between us. I said that maybe we had been too focused on numbers and practical considerations, and not enough on what we actually had together as a couple. I admitted that I still loved him and hoped we could find a way to reconnect and work through our differences. I thought he would soften toward me, even just a little bit. I expected him to at least engage in some kind of meaningful conversation about our relationship and whether there might be a path forward for us. Even if he wasn't ready to get back together immediately, I thought he would be open to talking things through and seeing if we could rebuild what we had lost. He replied the next morning with a single line, "I wish you well, but we're done." That was it completely. No greeting, no acknowledgement of what I had shared with him, no indication that he had any interest in discussing our past or exploring the possibility of a future together. Just a final, definitive statement that left no room for interpretation or negotiation. I didn't even cry when I read his response, which surprised me. I just stared at those words on my phone screen and read them again, like maybe I had missed some hidden meaning or subtext that would give me hope for a different outcome. But there was nothing there beyond exactly what he had written, a polite but absolute rejection of any possibility of reconciliation. That night, I sat down with my dad for a conversation I probably should have had months earlier. He's not usually someone who offers a lot of advice or commentary about my personal life. He typically just listens quietly to whatever I'm going through and lets me work things out for myself. I told him the entire story from beginning to end. The proposal at the restaurant, my response about the $250,000 threshold, Tyler's decision to end our relationship, and everything that had happened since then. I explained about Tyler's recent promotion and financial success, and how I had tried to reach out to him only to be completely shut down. My dad looked at me for a long while after I finished talking, clearly thinking carefully about what he wanted to say. Then he told me something that I hated hearing, but knew was absolutely true. You don't wait until the house is built and then ask for the keys. You build with your partner or you lose them. That simple statement hit me harder than anything anyone had said to me throughout this entire situation. I realized that I had been thinking I was being smart and strategic about my future, holding out for better circumstances and a more secure foundation before committing fully to the relationship. But I wasn't actually holding out for anything positive. I was holding back from everything that mattered. I had spent months watching Tyler struggle and work toward his professional goals, waiting for him to arrive at some predetermined destination and assuming he would still want me to join him when he got there. I didn't think he would actually walk away from what we had built together. I thought he needed me too much, that our emotional connection and shared history would be enough to keep him invested in our relationship, even when I wasn't fully participating in building our future. But it turns out Tyler didn't need me at all. He was perfectly capable of achieving his goals and creating the life he wanted without my conditional support and temporary commitment. While I was calculating the financial requirements for our relationship, he was focusing on becoming the kind of person who could succeed independently. Now I see him sometimes, not in person, but in social media posts and stories shared by people we used to know. He looks really good in all the photos, relaxed and confident and genuinely happy. He always appears calm and collected, like he has gotten everything he wanted out of life and is completely satisfied with the choices he has made. Maybe he really did get everything he needed. Maybe walking away from our relationship was exactly what he required to focus fully on his career and personal development. And here I am, still living in that same apartment we used to share, still stretching my paycheck every month to cover basic expenses, still calculating the gap between what I expected my life to look like and what I actually have. I don't know if I regret what I said to him that night at the restaurant. It felt honest and reasonable at the time, like I was just being clear about my standards and expectations for the future. But I definitely regret thinking that my honesty wouldn't cost me anything, that I could state my requirements without risking the loss of everything we had created together. I thought Tyler would see my conditions as motivation to work harder and achieve more. I believed that if he really loved me, he would rise to meet my expectations and prove that he was worthy of the commitment I was offering. But instead of inspiring him to fight for our relationship, I just showed him that my love was transactional and conditional on his ability to meet specific financial benchmarks.